Cagney and Lacey are back next Saturday at the earlier time of 10:10. This is BBC One, and if you were with us earlier this evening, you'll know that we had to abandon tonight's news because of a fire at the television centre. So before our late film Car Wash, we're returning now to Jan Leeming and David Icke for the news and sport.
Good evening. Moscow offers a new deal on European missiles. Gorbachev says it's not dependent on Star Wars. It's another challenge for President Reagan and his new chief of staff. France jails a Lebanese terrorist for life, and the fans who don't like the West London soccer merger. The Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev has tonight suggested a new deal on the removal of medium-range nuclear missiles from Europe. It's similar to the one he discussed with President Reagan at last October's Reykjavik summit. On that occasion, it foundered because of Soviet insistence that the United States give up its Star Wars program. But the new offer would allow negotiation on medium-range missiles separately from other arms control issues. Tonight, the White House called the Russian proposal positive.
When the Reykjavik summit stumbled on the issue of space weaponry, the Soviet Union insisted that no single part of the complex package could be plucked out and handled separately. So it has remained until today. As long as Mr. Reagan insisted on retaining the Strategic Defense Initiative, Mr. Gorbachev said no other deal was possible. But now the Soviet leader has reversed himself. The Geneva negotiators, according to his new statement, will be asked to conclude an immediate deal to eliminate medium-range nuclear missiles in Europe. The other issues can wait. The weapons they're talking about are those with a range of between 600 and 3,000 miles. They include Cruise and Pershing in the west and SS-20s in the east. Removing them has considerable populist appeal, but some West European governments, which view nuclear missiles as a counterbalance to greater conventional forces in the communist bloc, have responded more cautiously. Mr. Gorbachev was expected to make some announcement at the Peace Forum in Moscow a fortnight ago. The decision to hold it over until now is almost certainly connected with the Soviet view of the political turmoil in the United States.
President Reagan's administration is still reeling after the findings of the Tower Commission. A new chief of staff, Howard Baker, has just been appointed, and his predecessor, Donald Regan, has cleared his desk. The president has promised an aggressive agenda for the remainder of his term in office, and his new top aide starts work on that timetable on Monday.
Baker was summoned by a president in desperate need of credible staff and policies. He was third choice as chief of staff. He didn't seem to mind.
And I expect that there'll be good things out of the final 2 years of the Reagan administration, and I intend to help him. And if we do those things, if we grasp the initiative and go forward, I think credibility will follow in its wake.
Baker rose to prominence during the Watergate hearings, making famous the two questions, what did he know and when did he know it? Baker himself knows Congress well. He's a former Senate Majority Leader, trusted by both parties.
I think Howard Baker's appointment as Chief of Staff gives the White House some instant credibility that they desperately need.
The appointment of a new Chief of Staff is just the first step Congress required of Mr. Reagan, but it's an important one, a sign that after weeks of apparent immovability, he's prepared to respond to public criticism. But it wasn't a smooth response. Last night, Donald Regan resigned with a terse one-sentence letter, apparently angry that his successor was in the White House before he was out. Speaking on radio today, Mr. Reagan tried to give him a graceful exit.
Don Reagan indicated to me some time ago that he would like to return to private life. So yesterday, I regretfully accepted his resignation.
It was a surprising statement, given Reagan's own views on the subject so often expressed.
Considering resigning?
No, I'm not considering resigning. I serve at the pleasure of the president, and when it's time for me to go, we'll talk about it. But this isn't the time.
It is the time now, and Donald Regan was at the White House this morning to pack his things. He may not be the only casualty. The president is to announce further measures next week.
Security forces in France are on the alert after the Lebanese terrorist Georges Ibrahim Abdallah was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment by a court in Paris for his involvement in the murder of 2 diplomats 5 years ago. His lawyer said the verdict would look like declaration of war to many Arab militants. Yesterday, the state prosecutor had asked the court to treat Abdullah leniently because it could leave France open to terrorist attacks.
Abdullah was brought to the court building from prison as usual this morning, but maintained his boycott of the proceedings. So he was downstairs in the cells when the president of the 7 judges handed down the life sentence. Today's judges were determined not to follow the example of a previous court. In Lyon, Abdullah was imprisoned for only 4 years at the state's request, despite conviction for having explosives. His terrorist friends tried repeated bombings to force his freedom. In Paris, at least 11 people were killed, but the French government seemed to show new resolution, resisting the pressure, mounting today's trial instead. The United States government joined as a civil party in this prosecution because 2 of their diplomats were among Abdullah's targets. And tonight, the American ambassador welcomed the life sentence.
The United States government, therefore, is very happy with the decision by the special French court. We sought in this trial justice, and I'm pleased to say that justice was rendered.
Abdullah, in prison at Fleury near Paris, could now expect to stay behind bars at least 15 to 20 years. Whether or not the judge's decision stands rests on the government's long-term willingness to resist trading his freedom, perhaps for the safety of French hostages in Lebanon.
A Mexican diplomat has been released by detectives after he was questioned for more than 30 hours about the murder of 2 prostitutes. This evening, the diplomat's solicitor said his client adamantly denied any connection with the crime.
The diplomat was released today, 34 hours after voluntarily going to Kensington police about the murders of prostitutes Rachel Applethwaite, aged 24, and Marina Monti, 27, found strangled within 24 hours of each other last month. The diplomat, Guillermo Suarez, bore a striking resemblance to this photo-fit picture of the man police wanted to question. Clothing found on one of the murdered prostitutes was labelled with his wife's name. After watching a reconstruction on the BBC's Crime Watch programme, he'd gone to offer police information and was arrested instead. A police statement said forensic examination of the diplomat's car and London flat had been carried out without positive result. There not being evidence on which to prefer a charge, the statement said, he had been released after giving an undertaking to return to Kensington Police Station on March the 31st, unless advised not to do so. The Mexican ambassador, who today had his 3rd meeting within 24 hours at the Foreign Office, said the question of waiving diplomatic immunity had not arisen, while the diplomat himself, back at the Mexican embassy in a solicitor's statement, adamantly and utterly rejected any connection with the death of the woman concerned.
Workers from France and Belgium joined a mass rally in Scotland today at a factory where 1,200 people are to lose their jobs. The Caterpillar tractor plant outside Glasgow has been occupied by the workforce since the American owners announced its closure 7 weeks ago. Last year, the government contributed to a large new investment plan, and the Scottish Secretary, Malcolm Rifkind, has been pressing the company hard to keep the operation going. At today's rally, churchmen and politicians of all parties were among those condemning the closure. John Horam, a transport minister in the last Labour government, has defected from the Social Democrats to the Conservatives. The announcement comes 2 days after the SDP's dramatic victory at the Greenwich by-election.
John Horam, who failed to win a seat for the Social Democrats at the general election, has become unhappy over the development of their economic policy. He said the alliance now resembled a Mark II Labour Party, with higher public spending and taxation. The SDP leader, Dr. David Owen, was relaxed about Mr. Horam's defection. It was sad, but Mr. Horam's worries about public spending were exaggerated. The Conservative Party chairman, Norman Tebbit, after the Conservatives' humiliating performance at Greenwich, made the most of Mr. Horam's move. It was of greater significance than any by-election result.
Well, that's flattering. I think it is, because what I've tried to do, and this is why I left it till after Greenwich, was to say I've been thinking really hard as an experienced politician of many years standing about what are the right policies for the country in the future over the next 20 or 30 years. And I'm broadly speaking, the sort of approach which Mrs. Thatcher is adopting, I believe is fundamentally right, and I believe that both the Labour Party and the Alliance are heading in the wrong direction, back towards the past, if you like.
The former Labour Chief Whip, Michael Cox, in an article in tomorrow's Sunday Times, has said that Labour's defeat at Greenwich was a shattering blow to their general election prospects. He delivered a strong attack on the hard left, who he said had caused trouble for large numbers of ordinary Labour Party members.
They've been conned by these people who come in, some of them well-meaning, but a lot of them careerists, others wanting to use and push the party for their own purposes. If the ordinary members of the party will have another look at these people and realise just what they've been up to, the damage they've done, then it's not too late to save the general election.
Mr Cox said it was time for the Labour Party to close ranks, but his remarks are likely to stir up fresh trouble.
Now here's David Icke on today's sport, with plenty of action on the pitch, not just from the players.
It was a day of demonstrations over the planned merger of Queen's Park Rangers and Fulham by the property company Marler Estates, which now owns both clubs. The start of the Rangers match against Manchester City at Loftus Road was delayed for 19 minutes when several hundred fans invaded the pitch, and there were similar demonstrations at Fulham. The property company wants to demolish the Fulham ground at Craven Cottage to make way for a housing development. Supporters have mounted a campaign to save the club.
It was an emotional protest on an emotional day for Fulham supporters. If nothing else, this episode has proved football fans can get along with each other. The visiting Walsall supporters showed their solidarity with Fulham. The home fans are determined to fight the merger. About 6,000 fans were there to see the teams run out, double the number at the last home match. At half-time came the real protest. Hundreds of fans began streaming onto the pitch. The police turned a blind eye as the Fulham supporters made their point peacefully, staying on the pitch and delaying the second half for 18 minutes. This, they promise, won't be the end of the campaign. The Football League Management Committee are to discuss the issue tomorrow, and a public meeting is planned for Monday. Fulham Football Club isn't dead yet.
And at least the Fulham fans had some